Good morning, guys. It is Monday, December 2nd, 2024. This is Bathrobe Business. I'm Georgi Oganov. I got my coffee and I got the news. So I was off. I tell you what, it wasn't off all last week. I just didn't have a video all last week. It was kind of a crazy week just being compacted. Staff that was out of the office due to the holiday, taking breaks. So my schedule was kind of a little bit more heavy than usual. I did actually make a video, but due to technical difficulties with my streamer, it didn't post properly. And then by the time I figured it out, it just wasn't worth posting. So I'm not going to delve too deep into last week's stories, except for three that I did save that I think are important that we will talk about. So mostly it's going to be news stories of the day. First things first, I want to share my winnings from last week. So last time I talked to you guys, I talked about Bath and Body Works and how I used it as a trade already. By the time when I talked to you guys, I already used it as a trade once, but then I was waiting for earnings. So here's what the earnings looked like. So in about 2-3 days, I gained about $2,000. Again, this isn't a trading account. This isn't a trading channel. I don't do too much with it, but I felt like this was just such an obvious buy with what was happening with Bath and Body Works, how undervalued it was, that it was a no-brainer. So $2,000. I didn't actually end up selling it for this much. I ended up selling it for about $1,890. But then the next day, so I sold it, and then the next day I actually rebought it and made another $200. So I made about $2,000 off of Bath and Body Works in addition to the trade I did the week prior. It was just a very undervalued stock. I couldn't see how anyone wasn't seeing that. And yeah, exactly what I expected. Earnings were fantastic, and I made about 2K on it. So I'm very happy with that. I exited it. I'm not in anything right now. I am looking at a couple different stocks, but nothing worth mentioning. So if I do decide to do something, I will tell you guys about it. That's pretty much it. So I'm going to remove that screen. Let's jump into today's stories. So like I said, I am going to share a couple of stories from give me 1 second. Whenever I switch from one of my pictures to one of my tabs, I have to mess with the whole thing over here. So I'm going to start with a couple of stories from last week that I think are worth mentioning. So first off, Trump it has selected. Well, no, I guess I won't talk about his cabinet selections, but I will talk about this story. So Trump vows an additional 10% tariff on China and 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So this is a complicated story. Why this is complicated is it's interesting from the fact that NAFTA was renegotiated under Trump. So those that don't know, we have free trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. We have since I think it started technically in the Bush HW presidency, but it was actually really finalized in the first Clinton administration. And Trump renegotiated that plan. And by many critics, it was actually a really good renegotiation. I mentioned Peter Zion on this channel often. Even he talked about that he's a huge critic of Trump, but he said that is one of the few crowning achievements of the Trump administration was you had a president that was anti-trade negotiating a trade policy. And Peter Thiel talks about that as well, is when you go into a fight, you kind of want the guy that's anti-trade to be negotiating your contracts because they're only going to settle for what is best for your own country. So Trump renegotiated the NAFTA agreement, but now he's talking about slapping on tariffs. So why that's perplexing is that would essentially get rid of NAFTA. Now it's not technically called NAFTA anymore. It's like the North American something. I can't even remember the name of it. It's just not catchy, so I don't know what it is, but I still call it NAFTA. So he's going to be renegotiated. So he renegotiated NAFTA, but now he's saying he's going to be slapping on tariffs. That would essentially be nullifying NAFTA entirely. Now, there is a chance that he's using this for negotiation, which is what the article talks about, that Trump is talking about Mexico due to fentanyl, due to border security, that these tariffs are only going to be in place if they don't get their side of the border in line. However, Canada, I don't see how that would be affected by border issues. We don't have a border dispute with Canada. We don't have any border issues with Canada. So I think this is actually going to be the trend of the Trump administration, is go very, very hawkish on tariffs. I think he's talked about it for years. In the Joe Rogan podcast, which is a long podcast, but in it he talks about his love of tariffs. Now, this is something he's espoused since the 80s during his first administration, but it really seems like he's going to be doubling down on it as a source of income for the government because he is planning broader deregulation, broader tax cuts. And in order to compensate for that deficit, I think he is planning to use a lot of tariffs to fill in those gaps and spaces in government income. So I don't think these are just negotiating tools. I think this is going to be a core pillar of the Trump administration, is increasing costs of tariffs in between not just United States and China, but United States, Mexico, and Canada. That's that story. Let's jump into a couple other stories I felt was worth mentioning. Now, one of the reasons I invested, as you know, in Bath and Body Works, why I say it, I should say I used it as a trade, was because it was because I saw the powerful strength in retail. And I've got a couple of stories that further underpin that. So Abercrombie and Fitch expects a strong holiday quarter as growth run continues. So Abercrombie and Fitch had powerful earnings of $2.50 per share versus $2.39 expected. Revenue rose $1.21 billion versus $1.19 billion. Similarly, Dick's Sporting Goods had a fantastic quarter and are expecting another robust holiday season. Their earnings were up $2.75 a share versus the expected $2.68 a share. Revenues were up $3.06 billion versus $3.03 billion. So across the board, we're seeing strong holiday sales across multiple retailers. And speaking of that, let's jump into Black Friday. So Black Friday spending of U.S. retailers were muted compared to online purchases. I don't think that's a surprise that there's not been a year since, I think, 2005, when they started really tracking the difference, that we haven't seen online retail grow in the face of brick and mortar. However, brick and mortar did grow. So sales on brick and mortar grew about 0.7%. As opposed to e-commerce, they grew about 14.6%. Now, when you adjust for inflation, the data is a little bit more muted, but still strong growth. So if you account for inflation, sales grew 11.1%. And in-store sales actually technically fell 5.4%. However, overall growth in sales is for the holiday season is up about 3%. And I know I saw that in this article, but I don't see it now. Here we go. Overall spending on Friday rose 3.4%. This is for Black Friday proper. From November 1st through January 24th, spending in stores and online is expected to be up about 3.2% year over year. This doesn't include Cyber Monday's sales yet. That is today, so we'll see what comes of that. But overall, retail is very, very strong. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say in regards to retail. Is retail, I think, and in overall as a sector, is doing very well. Now, let's jump into two last stories I'm going to talk about. The first is Intel. I'm just going to mention this in passing. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger is out and stock rose about 5%. So this comes as no surprise. We've reported multiple times throughout this year just the trouble going on at Intel. This guy, I can never say his last name, Pat Gelsinger, came on in 2021 to try to turn the company around. That was literally right as the AI craze was starting, and it was literally the just a nail on the coffin for Intel. They have been doing progressively worse and worse and worse. They've talked about doing AI chips. They supposedly were supposed to launch them this year. I have not heard anything about it. The only names in the game continue to be NVIDIA, AMD. It just seems like this company is just sliding down, down, and down. I know that they are making heavy investments for the next wave of AI with more advanced chips, but so far that has yet to yield anything. So this is just a bad story for Intel all in all. Now, last story I'm going to talk about is going to be Stellantis. So Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares resigns amid problems in U.S. and falling sales. So for those that haven't been following this, Stellantis is doing pretty bad. They've had multiple issues with all of their brands. They're revamping a lot of their lines because they're moving to EVs. Their current clientele isn't very happy with it, but they're still moving full steam ahead with it. Now, I did post a link to actually my brother's page. So ignore this ugly face of this ad. But my brother, who has a YouTube channel, did a fantastic analysis on Stellantis just a couple months ago. This video is 2 months old, but he pretty much predicted this day of reckoning coming for Stellantis. 8 issues plaguing Stellantis, and it's a sinking ship, or can it be saved? He gives a full breakdown of why Stellantis is doing so bad. He goes through not just the fact that they're switching to EVs, but management issues, manufacturing issues. He gives you the full breakdown of that. I'll have you guys watch that or refer to it for reference. But I think there's a greater trend here that's an issue as well, simply because all companies are going to EV one way or another. Companies are moving into electric. Those can be accelerated by the government. Those can be decelerated by the government. Those can be more heavily in one region versus another. But at the end of the day, cars are going electric. Within the next 50 years, I don't think gasoline is going to drop off entirely, but I think it's going to be more of a boutique kind of sector where, like, some people like Harleys, some people like Indian motorcycles. It's going to be at that level where it's going to be something that maybe you purchase or maybe you have for weekend enjoyment, but not your daily driver. And I think the brands are going to be reflective of that as well. They're going to be more niche. They're going to be more specialized. They're going to try to cater to a specific clientele. Now, when you do that, something else happens. If all cars go EV, engine power doesn't really matter anymore. So for the last 200 years, maybe that's an exaggeration, but since Henry Ford created the production of the Model T, or was it the Model A? I can never remember. Since he created that, everyone has been trying to create the best engine possible. That doesn't really matter anymore because when you go electric, plus or minus a second here or there, for the same amount of money, you're going to get the same amount of power across the board. It doesn't matter if you're a BMW. It doesn't matter if you're a Kia. It doesn't matter if you're a Mazda. Power is going to be pretty much stabilized. Engines are essentially a commodity. They're going to be standard across the board. You're going to have to try to win out in other ways. And I don't think the industry has figured out how to do that yet. When cars become electronics, what happens to so many different brands? I think this is kind of the day of reckoning where companies are going to have to deal with what they're going to do in the long term. I think a lot of this fallout over Jaguar is really with that because Jaguar doesn't know what to do. I think they're the first company that realizes it, and they might be the first on the chopping block. They had terrible sales, so they needed a revamp, right? They took like a year off. My brother told me this. They took a year off from actually manufacturing cars, which is crazy to me how a car company can do that. But they did it to rebrand and restructure. So far, I haven't liked the product. I don't think anyone has. But I think this is what they're trying to figure out is, well, what are we going to do if power and doesn't matter anymore? If we're going EV, we have to create a style so that people are buying our cars not for the power, not for the engine, because that doesn't matter, but for the style itself. And so I think they're trying to define themselves as a brand more so than they are as a car. And I think a lot of companies are going to have to move in that direction as the market becomes commoditized with EVs. So they've selected their brand, they've selected their style, and they're going to try to play that to fuel car sales. I think that for the large portion of these companies, it's not going to work. I think we're going to see a large of shrinking, consolidation, reduction in the next 20 to 30 years of car companies. I don't think you need as many selections as you do. If we look at the electronics market, like for example, phones, there's really two major phone manufacturers, right? One way, well, I guess you could say there's Samsung and Apple, but I would say there's Samsung, Apple / Google. Google exists. Operating systems are based off of Google, Android. And so you only really need 2 to 3 companies for that. Similarly with TVs, with, any type of electronic. There's Samsung, there's Sony, there's a few American brands. So you don't really need a broad spectrum of these things when you have an electronic. So I think you're going to see mass consolidation and closing of a lot of these companies and brands. And I think you're going to see these brands pivot into more style, more into what would be considered traditionally accessories, because now those accessories are going to define what makes the difference. On your iPhone, do you have blue bubbles or do you have green bubbles? What is your camera capability? What is your battery power? That's probably going to come into play as well. So a lot of this stuff that has traditionally been an accessory is going to become the main reason for purchasing, as well as things like brand. Whatever brand of car can define themselves as the Apple, as the cool brand, is going to probably do very well. So far, that's been Tesla. But I think given the fact that Tesla sales have declined as well, I don't think that's a given that they're going to be the cool brand of the future. Granted, they have they're still the leader in EVs. They have a few name flagship brands like the Cybertruck and the Model S, but I think that that title is still up for grabs of whoever can be the Apple computers of electric cars. I think we're too early into this to say that it's going to be Tesla moving forward. And I think Stellantis is just going to be one of those sacrificial lambs. Now, the next CEO could come in and totally revamp this. I know they're going to be doing an EV challenger slash charger. I know that's in the pipeline. I know it's going to be coming out. It's just that kind of car. It really is a niche car for someone that loves that brand. And are they going to be receptive to EVs in general? So that's pretty much it. Like I said, reference my brother's channel. He does fantastic analysis on this, way better than I can. But I think that's my take on it, is that the general trend is going to be consolidation, closure, and rebranding into more of the accessories than the actual cars themselves. So that's it. I hope you guys have a productive Monday. I will see you guys hopefully back here tomorrow, and have a good day. Bye.